devastating Mori poll shows Europe's people share British rage over EU. This article is worth a read, to be honest, but I won't bore you with it because it's quite a lengthy one. However, I will point out that the Ipsos Mori poll the headline refers to shows that 60% of Italians want a referendum on their relationship with the EU, and 48% at the moment would vote to leave. And in France, 58 people want a referendum, with 41 people saying they would vote to leave. And even 39% of the Swedes would vote to leave the EU. Let me let you into a secret. It's not like the type of TTIP secret. I'm not going to put a 30-year ban if you tell someone this secret, or throw you in prison if you discuss it with anyone. I'm going to tell you this secret now. It's this. The great European project is coming to an end. Regardless of the outcome of the EU referendum in the UK, the EU project is over. But the overpaid, unelected bureaucrats just don't realise it yet. Or if they do, they're not letting us know that they know, if you know what I mean. They're doing their best to keep the lid on Greece blowing up again before the UK holds its EU referendum, because Greece blowing up again because of the draconian payments dictated to them by the unelected bureaucrats in the EU and the IMF would sway untold numbers of people to vote for Brexit. The EU are so arrogant that they think they can get away with removing elected prime ministers and installing technocrats. After all, they are unelected dictators who will do anything to hold things together to control the people, and also, of course, they will do anything for the bankers. The fear-mongering this week has hit a new low, with David Cameron saying in a speech that there could be war in Europe if the UK vote to leave the EU. Does anybody believe a word this man says anymore? Honestly, does anyone really believe a word Cameron says? He's so desperate to keep the UK and the EU for the Rothschilds that he will now say and do almost anything. NATO has kept the peace in Europe, not the EU. Look at the EU's role in what happened in Ukraine and tell me that the goal of the EU in Ukraine was peace, because I can assure you it bloody wasn't. And NATO now look like they've gone onto a forward offensive position rather than a defensive position with what they're doing with Russia. The war games on their border, the missile defense systems on their border. NATO look like it's becoming aggressive, which could easily lead to war. Not the UK leaving the EU, that's not going to lead to war. NATO's actions towards Russia will lead to war, Cameron, you muppet. But as if that propaganda from Cameron wasn't enough this week, we now have this video from the Remain campaign.
At the age of 18, I joined the RAF to do my bit for Britain.
We sacrificed many, many men in both world wars, and this was to establish a peaceful and a prosperous union. We can't sacrifice that now.
If it breaks, or if we are not in that union, then countries will fall apart.
We would be going backwards, not forwards, in what we've set out to cure after the terrible tragedies of the Second World War.
The only solution is to bind together, hold together. There we find the strength.
For me, Britain is stronger in Europe because it reflects the values my generation fought for in Europe during the Second World War.
First question. Since the Treaty of Rome wasn't signed into being until 1957, how the heck could these brave guys be fighting for the Union in the early 1940s? World War II wasn't about fighting to keep the Union together. The Union didn't exist as World War II was being fought. Yes, it was being conjured up in the background, but it didn't exist. Jeez, these people think you're so stupid, and now they're trying to change history to fit their blinkered view of the EU so that we don't leave. World War II was about stopping a dictator. Hitler didn't win World War II, but Germany certainly did. Germany are the powerhouse behind the EU dictatorship we have in place today. This is why we must leave. Do these veterans seriously not realise that the EU is just as much of a dictator that Hitler was? With the only difference being that the EU has a friendly face on it. And I'm sorry to say that if we stay in the EU, then the brave friends of these veterans would have died in vain, because the dictatorship has won in the end. And as for the EU's values, let's have a look at the values the EU holds, shall we? And remember that by their deeds you shall know them. The EU's accounts haven't been signed off for 20 plus years because of fraud and corruption, with over 100 billion euros of spending that's suspected to be fraudulent and corrupt. The EU has destroyed democracy in nation states by removing elected governments and installing technocrats. The EU has forced everyday people to hand over their hard-earned money to pay the bankers' gambling debts. Remember, the EU Commission are 100% unelected. Remember, the EU Parliament is truly pointless and merely ceremonial. So let's have a recap on the values the EU holds. Fraud, corruption, authoritarianism, dictatorship, stealing, robbery, deception, mockery, and hubris. Those old boys have been duped into thinking that staying in the EU is a good thing, when it clearly is no such thing at all. They fought in a war to stop exactly what the current EU is all about. We are run by unelected dictators that are controlled by Germany. Ian Duncan Smith came out and said that Germany had a veto on Cameron's renegotiations, rendering them pointless. That's why he came back with scraps from the table at best. Ian Duncan Smith, Germany had UK-EU negotiation veto. Germany had a de facto veto over David Cameron's EU renegotiation, ex-minister Ian Duncan Smith has said. He told The Sun the PM ditched plans in 2014 to demand an emergency brake on migration after Germany objected. These old boys no doubt lost friends fighting for Germany, to stop Hitler creating a dictatorship, to stop us being ruled by Germany, only for us to now be ruled by a dictatorship that is run by Germany. Nothing happens in the EU without Germany's approval. We live under a dictatorship in all but name. Sorry, old boys, but you've got it wrong. You fought for freedom and democracy. What we have under the EU is far from freedom. And let's be honest, democracy in the corridors of Brussels is a dirty word. If you had a group of 28 unelected people telling you what to do and enforcing their will on another group of people 80% plus of the time, that would be considered an authoritarian group or a dictatorship. This is what the EU is. Strip down all the trimmings and all the nonsense, and you're left with 28 unelected commissioners that dictate. They dictate where the EU is going, and that is to become a United States of Europe without the people ever voting for it.